Good evening. I'd like to ask the people in the last row, can you see the overhead? Okay, because there's plenty of room down front if you want to move down front. And some of the overheads have much smaller print, so you might want to move down. There's seats in the front here, but that's perfectly up to you. I'd like to welcome you tonight to this presentation on the MCAS test. We really did this for the public, but more particularly for the parents, to give a general overview of the test and to explain how to read the individual reports that your children received, as well as to look at how the district did. I'll be doing a presentation tomorrow night at the school committee as well. And the presentation won't be very long because we want to have time for you if you have questions. So in general, I've put an outline for the evening, what I'd like to cover. And the first thing is just an overview of the test. And again, there's been so much in the news and on the radio, TV, the newspapers, on the internet about this test that I'm sort of the opinion that most people probably know it. So I'm going to run through this rather quickly because I don't want to assume that you do. I just want to cover it. And if you have any questions as I go along, please just stop me. The MCAS tests were mandated by the Education Reform Law of 1993. And they were to be given in grades 4, 8, and 10. Now, the legislation says that they can be given in other grades, but they must be given in those grades, and they must be given in the core subject areas. The first testing of the MCAS was given this last springtime, and 3 of the core subject areas were tested: English Language Arts, or I abbreviated here ELA, mathematics, and the third one is called Science and Technology. And that technology is not computers. It's more design, that kind of technology. The social studies core curriculum area will be tested this year for 8th and 10th graders and the following year for 4th graders. So over the years to come, there'll be 4 tests given. In additional years down the road, world languages will probably be added to the testing cycle as well. The tests are based on the curriculum frameworks, and the curriculum frameworks are guides that were established by the state through a variety of committees, teachers, people from the community, people from higher education, parents, and they look into 7 core curriculum areas. The tests are designed to reflect what's in those curriculum frameworks. And to tell you that the frameworks are exactly that. They're frameworks. They give a general guide as to what students should know and be able to do at the end of grade 4, at the end of grade 8, at the end of grade 10, and also at the end of grade 12. And so these tests are supposed to be questions that reflect what is contained in those curriculum frameworks. And in fact, the test that we've just received back, we received copies of 80% of the questions that were used on the test. They're available on the internet, and copies have been sent to every one of the schools. When you look at those test questions, you will see that each question on there refers to a specific section in the curriculum frameworks. And that's very helpful as we look through. The test questions themselves, this is a very different test than probably most of your children have taken in the past when you've heard them take, these standardized tests. Usually those tests that students take, the Iowas that we take here in Wakefield, are what we call norm reference test. You do not get the score of your child's when you get your results back. What you get is a percentage score, and the percentage is based on a bell curve. A certain percentage of students in the United States will be in the 90th percentile, and then it's broken down. And so if your child gets in the 50th or 60th percentile, it means that they scored 50 or 60 in the 50th or 60th percentile. In other words, they're above that many other students in the country. But it doesn't tell you really how many right or wrong they received. This test, the Massachusetts MCAS test, is a criterion reference test, and so it's based on how many you get right and wrong. So technically, all students could get all the questions right. Or you might get a group of people in one section, as you probably saw in some of the graphs in the paper. So this is a very different test. In addition to that, most of the time when students take norm reference tests, they're multiple choice. This MCAS test consisted of 3 different types of questions. Multiple choice questions were part of the test, but there were also what we call open response questions, where the students had to write down an answer. They didn't color in a little circle, they actually had to write an answer down, solve a problem. And then there were what other questions were called open-ended questions. And the open-ended questions were really essay-type questions that students were given in each of the subject areas. In addition to that, in the English language arts, there was what was called a writing prompt, where a student was given a long essay to write on a particular topic or subject. These tests were given in May of last year, and they ran from 15 to 17 hours. In actual fact, they ran longer. That was the estimated time from the state. These are untimed tests, and when we gave them to our students, we found it took much longer than that. The tests were given during a 3-week time frame in May. And all the students were tested, and the way we did it was we basically tested every day for about 2 weeks, and then used that last week to try to do makeups. This year, the testing will be a little different. They will do the special writing prompt, which is a longer exercise, in April, and then they will do the remainder of the test for 2 weeks in May, late May. Having given that overview, now I'd like to look at the actual report that was sent home to parents and just explain it to you. It came to you with a letter on the outside from the Commissioner of Education. As you turned it inside, there were several areas that were designated. At the top, you had the student's name, and then you had 3 areas of testing. English language arts, mathematics, and science and technology. Then there was a column that listed how your student did, what was the rating given. And it could be failure, needs improvement, proficient, or advanced. In the next column, it gave you the scaled score. And the scaled score means they took the raw score, just the actual numbers, and they converted them to a scale that was consistent for the 3 tests. The scaled score for this test runs from 200 to 280. So the least you can get is a 200. The most you can get is a 280. And then each of these rankings is done on a 20-point interval. So for failure, it's between 200 and 219. For needs improvement, it runs from 220 to 239. For proficient, 240 to 259. And for advanced, 260 to 280. And then also, this is a very important thing, on the score, it showed you graphically, a little bar graph there, where your son or daughter scored. And the reason there's a bar graph there is to show you that this is the range in which your child's score fell. In other words, if your child was to take the test again tomorrow, they would most likely fall within that range. So it's very important to see where that range is. You can see on this one, sometimes it's right on the line between proficient and advanced, or needs improvement and proficient. And depending on where it is, it gives you an idea of where your child stands. Are they at the top of one scale, or at the bottom, or right in the middle? Then the next part of the report explained what the different ratings were. It explained advanced, it explained down to failure. And again, I want to emphasize that these designations are very arbitrary. The Board of Education in Massachusetts debated these designations for months. And in fact, the needs improvement, some people thought should have been called basic. So they're arbitrary designations. Some people didn't think that, they should use the word failure on these scores, especially this year, where it's the first year of the test and it was a baseline test. But this is what they used. Then there's a section, as we go down, that has a chart. And I think this is something that you have to understand how it's used. This looks at how your child scores and compares your child's score to his or her own performance. In other words, most of you, when you got this, probably had checks all down the middle that said, not much difference one way or the other throughout the score. However, you may have got a score that said weaker or stronger. All that means is in the area of that particular test, for instance, if it was English language arts, your child might be stronger or weaker in one of those areas. But you'll notice, for instance, this student had needs improvement for English language arts with a score of 230. Yet, within that 230, there was a weakness in writing and a strength in, there was a weakness in reading and a strength in writing. So that can be confusing. It's only comparing the strengths of your student themselves to themselves, not to anybody else. And then the bottom of the report has several bar graphs. And the bar graphs show you how your student did graphically compared to the other students in his or her school, to compare to other students in the town of Wakefield. Now, if you're at the middle school or the high school, the school and the district are the same. They're exactly the same because we only have one school at that level. And then the fourth bar is the state, how your child compared to how the average of the state was. Back of the graph simply was an explanation of all the different strands and also some information from the Department of Ed on how you can help your child, how you can get involved with schools. Okay, now let's look at Wakefield scores and the state. In grade 4, in the English language arts, it lists all the advanced, proficient, needs improvement, failing test, and failing absent. I want to make a little bit clear about this absent. If a student was absent for the 2 or 3 weeks, and we did have some students for a variety of reasons who did not take part of the test or all of the test, they received a 200, a failure, and that is averaged into the district score. Now, the reason the state is doing this is because they're trying to tell you, we want every student to take this test. And so, therefore, it's important to try to get those students in here to take that test. It's not always possible, and I think there's some things that are going to have to change. For instance, we had at least one child who was hospitalized at this time. And that child's score came back as 200. Absent, 200, failure, averaged into that school's percentages. So that is something, though, that you need to keep in account. Then we have the average scale score for Wakefield. And if you look at the last column over here, we can see our score is circled, and right below it is the state average. So in English Language Arts at grade 4, our average scale score was 233, and the state was 230. In mathematics, ours was 240, the state was 234. In science and technology, ours was 241, and the state was 238. At the middle school level, the English Language Arts, our score was 241, and the state was 237. The mathematics, our score was 228, and the state was 227. And in science and technology, our score was 228, and the state was 225. At the high school level, English Language Arts, our score was 238, and the state was 230. Mathematics, our score was 229, the state was 222. And in science and technology, ours was 233, and the state was 225. Now, some of you may have seen in the Globe some kind of a ranking. This was not done by the Department of Ed, that was done by the Boston Globe. And what they did was they just took all these average scores at each grade level and added them up and ranked them by the total number of points. If, in case you saw that, that's where that came from. Now we're asking ourselves, where are we at this point? Well, there are a couple of things you need to do with these test scores. As parents, you need to look at them in a certain way, and as a school district, we need to look at them in a certain way. As a parent, you need to look at the scores and say, are you surprised by them? If so, in what way? They scored higher than you thought, they scored lower. Does your child's school grades reflect what they received in this test? If they don't, then why not? Is it because we did not teach that material to them, that there's a gap in the curriculum? Or is it because your child was unfamiliar with this testing format, which is quite possible, because this was the first time and none of us had really seen it in advance? Or are there study habits that we need to look at? From the district's point of view, what we are going to do at each school has its own curriculum committee, is setting them up to analyze the school results. There are individual item analysis on every test question given back to the school. We can go through and see what each student, how they did on each question, whether they got it right or wrong, what type of question it was. We also have an analysis that breaks down by the strands in the curriculum framework, the topics, in other words. For instance, if we're looking at mathematics, it might be broken down to measurement, geometry, algebra, trigonometry. And then we would see how our students scored compared to the state. And we were able to look at this and get an idea of, was there a particular area that was weak? And if so, was it because it's not in our curriculum? Or was it because we didn't teach it at the right time of year? Or was it because the students had it 2 or 3 years ago and didn't have any refresher on it? There may be a variety of reasons. And so we have committees that are looking at all of these results, analyzing them. Now, we just received them about a week ago, and we're in the process now of distributing them, Xeroxing them, distributing them to the various schools and to the various departments to look at and to analyze. We also will be having curriculum committees to look at our current curriculum. We have been working the last couple of years on developing curriculum frameworks that are in line with the curriculum frameworks. In some subjects, that's been easier than others. For instance, social studies, they changed the framework. They couldn't agree on it for the last 3 years. Last February, they finally agreed on it, we think. They sent us out one. In English, it was about 1.5 years ago. In math and science, it was several years ago that they came out with them. So based on when we received them, we're working to align our curriculum with what's asked for in the frameworks. We also, because I told you earlier, received the tests themselves. 80% of the questions were released to us. We will be using those questions to help students see what the test is really like, to have practice questions, to analyze how students respond to these, and to help them to learn how to improve their test-taking techniques. Because it's a very different test. Many of the questions that we would consider essay questions are not a simple, tell me about photosynthesis. It's a question that usually involves 3 or 4 parts to it, and students have to answer all parts. So it's a more complicated test than a lot of our students probably have been used to. So our job is to make sure that we provide students with the appropriate training to answer these kinds of questions. And as I said, we develop new curriculum as needed. We know already that there are certain areas, the new curriculum frameworks in social studies has world history as part of the 4th grade. When we bought our textbook a couple of years ago, that was not in the curriculum framework because they hadn't agreed on it yet. So we are basically trying to play catch-up now and decide whether we buy new materials or whether we supplement in order to make that world history requirement. And we want to make sure that the state stays with this framework before we buy material and find out that they're going to change. So there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of collaboration that will be going on in all the schools over the next few months and over the summer in order to plan for the next round of tests, but more importantly, for the long term. As you know, the students who are currently in grade 8, those are the students who, when they're in grade 10, this will be what's called the high stakes test. Up until then, students will take it, get the results, but their graduation diploma will not be dependent upon them passing. And we don't even know what passing is at this point. We don't know whether anything above failing is considered passing or whether it's going to be something else in between. And that decision will be made by the state, hopefully within the next year or so. So with that quick overview, I have representatives from the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school here. And if you have any questions or concerns about the testing or questions about the format, I'd be glad to answer. There are microphones here, or if you just yell out, I can probably hear you. Questions? Yes.
My daughter did not take the test, but I'm very concerned about the system itself. When Boston Magazine did a survey last fall, it appeared that Wakefield was spending more per student than Reading or North Reading, yet they scored 20th or lower. We're at 77 in the state. Is there any plans to look at those systems to see where they're spending their money in comparison to where we are spending ours?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we did a survey about a year or two ago when we were doing looking into the English language arts. And there are a lot of reasons. It's not quite as simple as saying we're 77th. That's the Boston Globe saying we're 77th. That isn't necessarily the MCAS testing. And if you look at different grades at different levels, the scores are not necessarily consistent. So if you look at the elementary scores, the middle scores, the high school scores, it may not be as different as you might think. Part of the other thing is to look at these other school systems and see what in fact they do. In Reading, for instance, the elementary schools have a workshop every week for their teachers to work on curriculum development. We do not. I'm not saying that's the reason, but there are a variety of reasons that we should be looking into as ways that we can and should improve. So you're right, we will be looking, we have been looking. Everyone in the system, their goal is to show improvement. The unfortunate thing this year is that we just got the test results back now, and the new test will be coming for this year in April and May, which gives almost no time to do any kind of long-term curriculum change. But what we might be able to do is to try to help some of the students with test-taking techniques and things of that nature. Jeff?
One thing also to think about in that respect is that some towns like Reading schools don't do any buildings and grounds maintenance or anything, and Reading is one of them. So that's why they have the people cost a little bit. The DPW in the town take care of all the buildings and grounds. And our budget next year, I think, once we get going to DPW and get to the town taking care of the same thing for us, you can see our cost of people going down as well. There's a lot of things as far as cost of people goes.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but, I mean, we're looking to improve. And, if we can learn from any other community, we'll learn from another community. We're not happy with where we are, we'd like to improve. We're constantly looking at trying to improve. And so if somebody else has a better system and we can adopt it, we'd be glad to do that. Yes?
Well, the other thing that's important for people to realize is that this particular test, the MCAS test, it's the first generation of this particular test. All you're really doing is setting up a baseline so that you can judge progress from that particular point. It's going to take you 3 to 5 years to be able to get enough data to see whether or not A, the test is valid, B, if we're starting to change how we do our instruction within the Wakefield schools to match the needs of our students, to meet them where they are, so they can help them excel. So any overreaction on the part of people to this test at this time is just that. It's an overreaction. It seems that Wakefield is above the test across the board for the state, not hugely so in some regards, but I really wouldn't get too upset about measuring town against town. We need to look at where we are.
Right.
Then we need to see, okay, what are we going to do to move our students forward?
Right.
That's where the focus needs to be, not on Reading or the other towns, even though I don't understand what the gentleman is saying.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And the other thing to remember, as the tests come down the next year or so, it really does take several years to actually watch what happens, because this year when we test, we'll be testing a different set of 8th graders. What we really need to watch is those 4th graders as they move through and become 8th graders, and as they move through and become 10th graders, and see how they're testing. So that this year we're going to be testing a completely different group of children, which, may or may not reflect changes in curriculum or anything else we do. Yes? Okay, the curriculum frameworks themselves are available on the internet, and there's a copy in the public library. What we are doing is writing up curriculum guides to be used in each subject area that will coincide with what is recommended in those frameworks. The frameworks themselves from the state, you can get on the internet, and actually I think I have the DOE number. I think it's www. Oh, it's on there, okay. And there's a whole section that has frameworks and MCAS. You can look up everything now on the internet. But they also are available at the public library. You can pop by my office, and I have some extra copies as well. Yes?
I do think this issue of what the proper benchmark is for Wakefield is very important. I think it's helpful to see where we rank in the state, but I don't think that can be the benchmark. I think we have to have some sort of benchmark that it's Reading or it's North Reading or some sort of market basket of schools that we have a benchmark by which we can measure ourselves. So I guess I would be looking to you folks and say, it's an amalgam of Stone plus Reading plus whatever. That's really the comparable to Wakefield.
Yeah. I mean, a few years ago, the state actually tried to do this. They used to have, they were called KFC, kinds of communities. And they tried to group people of similar economic, social, geographic settings together, which was helpful in some regard. Sometimes we use things like the Middlesex League, but a lot of those communities really aren't similar to Wakefield. If you look at the surrounding communities, some of those communities are more similar to Wakefield than others. So you're right, and I'm sure everyone looked in the paper and looked at all the adjacent communities to see how they did compared to us. Well, I think the benchmark is we want all our students to be proficient. I mean, I don't care what Reading does. I want our students to be proficient. And so we're going to work to get everyone up to that proficient level. That's the benchmark the state is setting, which is a very high standard, by the way. If you look at the kinds of questions that are on here, I don't really care what Saugus does, what Linfield does. What we should all be looking for is to move as many students as we can out of the failing, out of the needs improvement, into proficient and advanced. That's the ultimate goal of the state. That's what our goal should be, no matter what the other communities are doing. Why is Reading more of a concern than, Melrose, Stoneham, Saugus?
I'm saying whatever
Yeah.
the proper benchmark is, I think as a school district, we have to define what the benchmark is. Otherwise, we can't evaluate the scores.
Well, no, you can't evaluate the scores, again, because the state is telling you. Failure, improvement, proficient. And that everyone in the state, they want to be in those ranks. So you're right. I mean, if you want to compare, how we did to surrounding communities, we were right in the middle of the surrounding communities. Is that good? Not if our students aren't in the high improvement or proficient range. No, it isn't good. Even if we were in the top of that group, if our scores are in the proficient range, that's where we need to be moving toward. So I understand your point, but I'm saying that we need to move toward being proficient in all areas. Yeah.
Well, not to hash the same point, but I'd like to emphasize it as well. I agree that we should all strive to have the children trend towards proficient and advanced. That's going to take a long time, and one of the only ways to know whether you've really gotten to where you really should be is to also watch how you compare to comparable communities.
And that's, yeah.
And when you rank up against all communities in the state, there really isn't really a sense of how comparable some communities in the western part of the state is. But we all have a general sense of how we feel about Wakefield versus Stone versus Reading.
And I'm sure everyone is doing that. I'm sure there's not a person, you'd have to be living in a cave not to have seen the Globe and seen the local newspaper. And that's in fact what we're doing in the school. Every teacher, every administrator, we all looked at the surrounding areas to see. Yeah, we know where we stand.
I recommend you use both benchmarks. How they are moving up on the scale within our own district, but also keep an eye on how they're doing versus other communities.
Yeah, and we're cognizant of that, obviously. Yes.
I just have a comment to make. I expected to come in here and have it passed. My daughter is in the 6th grade. She didn't take the test, but I'm concerned because she's seeing where she's going and what she's doing. I mean, I don't have a test score in front of me, but, we have these, you practically outnumber us almost. I mean, I'm just shocked that the people of Wakefield, the parents are not concerned about what's going on. I mean, and not to come down here, I mean, my daughter's a decent student, but to come down and find out what this is all about and where we're going. I think this representation in the hall here says more about what's going on than, the way we're doing with the curriculum. Because they spend more time at home with me than they do with you. You're directing them than I'm directing them. I mean, I think the parents have to be concerned about what goes on with their children and what they're doing in school and where they're going and how they can assist them. I think this is a very sad scenario right here with the number of people, the number of parents that come out and listen to what you have to say. I'm shocked.
Well said, well said.
I think that has more to do, quite honestly. I mean, I have a couple problems with the school systems and I have little issues here and there. But quite honestly, it has more to do with me encouraging my child than what you say. What I say really has more than what has more power, or at least should. When I'm directing them towards what you do, when I'm directing them to what you do on the computer, what you do with math, I need your guidance, obviously, and she does too, but
Well, you're definitely right. There's no doubt about it. This is a
part of the problem right here.
This is a partnership, and the schools have to do their job, but the more enrichment you can give at home when you talk about the assignments, when a child goes to answer an open-ended question, the more they can draw on from their experience, the better that answer is going to be than if they just get a question and out of the blue they don't have any context in which to put it except, well, I studied that in school. If there've been conversations at home where people have discussed the various assignments, those children have a better chance of scoring well. So yeah, it's definitely a partnership, no doubt about it. And, you know, we encourage parents to work with their children. Yes?
I have a couple questions. One, I'd like to know, if you do have some concerns about the MCAS test that your child did, what can we do about it, and what is the school going to do about it? And should we even be concerned about it, or what do we do with these now?
Okay.
What do we do with these?
Right, and again, one of the things I said in the beginning, that's what, everyone has to look at their own individual score. To see the town average doesn't mean anything. It's your individual student. And you have to look at those scores and say, where in that range of scores did my student score? For instance, if your child is scoring at 238, that's, 2 points below being proficient. And if the child took the test tomorrow, they might in fact be in that 240 range. That's a very powerful thing to know. Yes, there are needs improvement, but they're very close to being proficient. And in the range of scores, they are actually there. However, if they're down, at 230 or 229, they're right in the middle of that needs improvement. And if they're at, down below the failure range, down around 225, there should be real concerns. Now, what do you do about that, depending on where they are? Well, if they're fourth graders last year, they're fifth graders now, so they're now in the middle school. If they're eighth graders, they're now at the high school. So we have kids who are in different buildings. And so we've met with all the principals, and we've talked about how best to do this. And basically what we've been suggesting is that parents should call the school that their child was in. So if your child's in fifth grade and you're concerned about the scores, you should go and meet with the teachers from the year before, because they will be able to look at those scores and say, Johnny should have done much better in this because in class he really understood this material. Let's look and see what his scores were like and why he scored this way. On the other hand, you need to talk when you go to parent conferences or set up a particular parent conference to the teacher that the student has this year with your concerns to see, is my student getting a grasp of the material now? As a school system, our guidance department, we have people from both the middle school and the high school here. They have gotten back the results of all the students' tests. And one of their jobs is to look through and see, are there students that are way out of whack for where their grades are and where their performance on the MCAS is? If this is so, we need to identify them. We need to talk to them. We need to find out, some of the reasons why by looking at their scores. Yes?
Well, I just so happened that I had conferences right after I was speaking, so I did discuss it with the teacher. She was a little shocked as I was with some of the scores, but one of her comments was that the fourth grade math program was brand new last year, so a lot of the teachers had difficulty implementing it as well as the students grasping it. So she felt that the kids would probably do better this year if they were tested this year than they did last year. But that doesn't still alleviate some of the concerns they have on the actual test, the actual scoring. I mean, do you put your child in tutoring? What do you do with this? Is there going to be math programs set up? And what's going to happen?
Well, again, depending on the particular score, yes, there will be some tutoring, but again, it depends on who the students are. I'm not going to, I don't know where the cutoff level or where it's going to be at this point. That's one of the things we have to sit down and look at. In terms of your particular child, how they're doing in math, are they getting the concepts this year in it? And again, was it because of the testing format? That's one of the things we need to see, and that's going to take more practice. In fact, that's one of the things with these new programs. We put in a more challenging math program last year, and that's part of the raising the standards. It was difficult. We put in a whole new math curriculum in the middle school, saying fifth grade, we expected far more to be done in fifth grade, in sixth grade, so that by the time they're in eighth grade, they can do these tests. And so those changes will take some time.
Now, what about for the kids, like now I have started with testing this year, I've had two, I had a fourth grade test right now, I have an eighth grade test this year. What about the kids that are in eighth grade now that haven't had this new math curriculum? They didn't have it in fourth grade, fifth grade, they're just getting it now. What's being done now for them to help them here?
Well, the math coordinator, in fact, at the middle school has taken the materials and looked at them, and they'll be trying to do as much as they can in the next couple of months to shore up any of the skills that they thought that our students didn't do well on. You can be sure of that. But again, within the next couple of months, how much it's test-taking technique and how much of it is certain skills, until they analyze the results and say, was it geometry that they didn't do? If so, was it because we didn't teach that because we were teaching algebra to grade 8 students? And so they were weaker on geometry, then that means we need to have a component in there that does geometry or does measurement. That's what they're going to be looking at in this analysis as they go through. And as I say, I know the middle school math department very quickly took hold of this information and are starting to analyze it.
So how soon will we know what kind of help is going to be available for the kids? How soon is this going to happen?
Well, which kids are you talking about? The kids in the 8th grade?
Fourth grade, the fifth, the eighth grade, how soon?
One of the things we've been looking at, we have a limited, we got a small grant from the state to provide some tutoring. And we've been looking at whether we should spend most of that money preparing, for instance, 8th graders for the upcoming test or preparing 10th graders for the test. And again, it's very, very limited and will probably be an after-school tutoring program that will be available. Yes, way in the back.
I currently have a second grader, and I'm wondering what is going to be done in terms of curriculum so that the poor results won't be repeated in terms of elementary English. Is it the fact that the curriculum is not aligned with what's being evaluated, or what is the issue in terms of
Well, there's,
elementary performance?
well, actually, throughout the state, it was not that very high. And if you look at the tests themselves, some of the questions that were asked at the 4th grade level were very, very, very challenging. The reading,
Are we going to react to that and try and shore up our curriculum?
we most certainly are. We have an English Language Arts Committee that's looking at, we have several different groups of teachers who are piloting different programs to change our elementary reading program and writing program. And this has sort of been ongoing for the last few years. Your child now in 2nd grade should be the beneficiary by the time they're in 4th grade of having had, more kinds of writers' workshop that should improve their writing, more literature programs that should help them in the reading comprehension. So we're already doing a lot of these things. It's just a matter of, seeing them through and waiting to see how each student does with them.
I heard that there is a proposal out this morning to announce that
Yes.
second graders will now be evaluated.
Yes, I heard that at the Board of Education, I didn't get the details, I heard they were talking about moving the 3rd grade reading test to 2nd grade.
Or in addition to,
Yes,
will that be this year or do you not know?
I didn't hear the report today on the radio, somebody told me about it. It's been approved to do grade 2, so that's advance notice, a couple of months. No, the test they use in the 3rd grade now is a normed reference test called the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Whether they're going to use a similar component, I don't know, because I didn't hear the meeting today. Or whether, did you hear, Jim?
It's for next year, and it will be
A year from now.
similar to the Iowas that we
Okay.
did now.
And they'll still have the 3rd grade test as well?
I'm not sure on that.
Okay, we're not,
talking
yeah,
about
again,
something
this was just done at the board today, so we'll be getting,
How can I be assured now that my second grader is going to hopefully get the skills she needs to move on, not only in this test, but also, sometimes when you restrict what you can teach, you're going to limit creativity and all that. Isn't that what needs to balancing act?
it is.
Especially as you get
hopefully the test, we're only teaching to the test if the test is covering the material that we want to cover and that the state tells us we need to cover. And this is the first year that we've aligned our new curriculum framework. Every teacher in October received a new curriculum K-4 curriculum guide for English language arts, which says this is what you should be doing in each grade, in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, so that by 4th grade, we are where the state frameworks say we should be. So we're doing it now.
So if you thought if you're doing okay, then there should not be a problem unless you're saying test taking is better.
That's what and part of that we're not going to know until we watch this for a couple of cycles. But we're not standing still. We are doing a lot of curriculum evaluation and curriculum changes. Yes?
You know, as part of the analysis of the results, you talk about curriculum and students and the practice of trying to focus on potential changes. With that, it seems to make sense, too, that teachers have an impact in there, too. Would there be any kind of evaluation on the teachers themselves, in particular subject matters?
Well, we have an evaluation process right now where every teacher is evaluated. And they're evaluated on a range of things.
But evaluated based on scores that, their students are obtaining.
We haven't done that, and there's a lot of reasons for that at this point. For instance, even in comparing the elementary schools, you have to be very, very careful. We have some very small schools in Wakefield, and if you're trying to compare a school that has 20 students to a school that has 75 students, or, comparing them to a bigger school someplace else, the comparison statistically is not really valid or fair. There's so few scores, and then it can change so dramatically based on the makeup of those 20 students that you have. So to judge a particular teacher on this one test for this one year would be very unfair. Over the long, and also you have to realize this is not a test of the 4th grade teacher. It is not a test of the 8th grade teacher. It is not a test of the 10th grade teacher. It is a test of the K through 4 system, of the K through 8 system. So to say, are you going to blame the 4th grade teacher who has the student this year when that learning has taken place over the 3 previous years would be very unfair, I think. However, if you will see over the period of time, if there are certain schools that maybe you find, let's look in mathematics. If you find that one school is, every year that school is low on decimals or something like that, then that is something you would go and say, why every year are you teaching it? If you teach it in June, it's not going to help them on the test in May. So this would be something you need to change. If you are teaching it and they're still not doing well, then we need to look at the way you're teaching it. So in that way, the test can be very helpful in looking at the curriculum that's being taught in the schools. Yes? You can come to my office and we'll sit down and talk if you'd like. Okay? And part of it is we're in the process of developing all these frameworks and changing, and it takes a lot of time to put together a K through 4 curriculum that is in line with the frameworks. And that time is usually available over the summer months. So it's what you can get done over a summer in most cases. So as I said, we just last year, we've got a math curriculum guide and an English language arts curriculum guide. We're working on the science and the social studies one that was up in flux for such a long time that we need to revisit that this year and start to get that coordinated as well.
When were those frameworks originally available?
It differed for each one. They had to be approved by the Board of Education, and they were developed by a whole team of people. I mean, just a large, large committee. And the science and math ones were the first ones approved because they pretty much more or less copied the national standards. The English language arts and the social studies ones were extremely contentious. They could not agree. In fact, the social studies framework, they ended up getting rid of the whole committee and assigning a couple of people to write it up. And that's the one that just came out less than a year ago.
So really, the state is asking you to evaluate really without being prepared in some cases.
Yes.
Do you think there's any correlation between some towns that are better prepared or maybe aligned earlier?
They may have been. It may have just been their curriculum to begin with. Or it may just be, other factors that have gone into it. Again, what is the experience of the kids coming into those schools? Are they more advantaged in terms of having more cultural background to draw on to answer a lot of these questions? That's a big thing. And I don't know whether you can actually measure that. I mean, if you look at the way the scores came out, they're pretty interesting. I think the schools that were at the top weren't a big surprise, and the schools that were at the bottom weren't a big surprise. And why is that? Yes.
Are these curriculums actually discussed between school systems?
Sometimes.
To me, it would be, in a situation like that where it's so contentious, wouldn't it almost be better just to say, okay, who's successful? Let's just copy it.
I agree. It's almost a little bit of a guessing game. In other words, the state frameworks give you this broad range. It tells you how, it doesn't tell you what to teach in grade 4. It doesn't tell you what to teach in grade 2. It doesn't tell you what curriculum to use or what textbooks or what materials to use. And you're right. It'd be really nice if the state almost said, here are the 5 or 6 books you can choose from. Here's the curriculum. Instead, each city and town has to grapple with, what are we going to teach?
But when you have Reading and North Reading just right across the way there, wouldn't it, and they've done so much better.
Well, it's interesting. When we were doing the English language arts, the reading committee last year, we called up Lexington. We called up, must have been about 25, 26, 30 communities, looking at what they used and what materials. And what was fascinating was that several of these communities, each school did their own thing. Brookline, Lexington, they did not have one curriculum that was universal for all their elementary schools. And we called other successful communities, and they used a variety of things. So I wish there was one set curriculum you could say, that's the golden one, let's grab it. But in our calls around, we haven't seen that there's a golden one to grab. Yes. And what we're trying to do is, we have grade level meetings where we have the teachers from all the different schools get together, and we're trying more and more to coordinate that so that it is consistent throughout. Yes.
So what you're saying is that all the elementary schools have are working off the same curriculum, but it's up to the teachers to teach it in whichever way they want to? Is that how it's done right now?
That's more or less how it's done. That's more or less the way it's done everywhere. I mean, there's a curriculum. In some of the curriculum areas, we have specific materials that we give the teachers to use, such as in mathematics,
Well, in all seriousness, that gentleman was saying about the teachers scoring and all that. Who knows whether or not the teacher is teaching that curriculum and is doing it per se? It's the way, who's to say it's being done?
well, that's why we have principals in every building to make sure that well, not only that, but we have meetings. I go around and I talk to the teachers, find out what they're doing. The principals are in and out of the rooms all the time, checking to make sure that teachers are indeed teaching their students and following the curriculum.
Right, but wouldn't the scores or the marks from these type of tests give you a better idea
one of the things you have to realize is there's a range of scores. So that in any one of these buildings, you have students who are scoring proficient and advanced, needs improvement, and failure. So that it doesn't, the average score is that just that, the average score. There are students scoring above that and below that. And, again, you have to realize this is not testing the 4th grade teacher or the 8th grade teacher. This is a culmination of what the students have learned over the last 3 or 4 years. So that if you get a poor score or a lower score in 4th grade in mathematics, that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular 4th grade teacher is totally responsible for that score.
Well, at the beginning of the school year last year, we were told there was a new math program implemented, and it was because it was designed towards the MCAS. It was designed so the students would be able to take the MCAS and a type of question. So I'm assuming that the math and the curriculum that they gave the teachers was to help to prepare for this. That would have been brand new. Nothing taught from K through 3, brand new.
Yes, but the student's knowledge of it wasn't like the student didn't learn any mathematics for the 4 years before that. So that one, having that for 1 year wasn't going to be a magic bullet. It was still going to be added on to the previous knowledge that student brought into that class that year. Others? Yes.
Yeah, I know that a lot of different input went into the curriculum framework that has taken more or less time in different areas. What did you folks feel about the way that was operationalized by the test questions themselves? Were you surprised by the types of questions, by the difficulty of questions, by the representative of them? So that's one question. The other question I think related to that I have is, how did the results of Wakefield students compare to your expectations? Just your gut feeling as you went into this. Obviously, for the first time, you know what would happen. What was your pulse on how Wakefield students do, and then how they actually did? I mean, independent of comparisons of the towns or the state as a whole. What's your?
Let me do the first one, how we look at the questions. I think as the students were taking, there were some questions we thought were, pretty straightforward. There were other questions we thought that were extremely challenging, and there was a whole section of questions that we knew we really didn't address too well. For instance, in the science and technology, 25% of the test deals with the technology part, which is basically an outgrowth of what the old shop teacher used to do, teaching about in design and talking about industrialization and productivity. And we don't really teach it in science class, and we're debating now where we should be teaching this, if it's going to be part of that test. There were also other questions such as the English language art, the writing prompt. The 8th grade one we thought was a really pretty good one for kids to write about, because it asked them to write a persuasive essay about TV or, censoring TV. Well, any 8th grader can almost write about that. Whereas the high school had a very challenging literary criticism that they had to write based on a reading. So they varied tremendously. They were very uneven, I would say, the questions.
Do the school districts of the state have input or feedback opportunities back to the Department of Education in formulating that in the same way that the curriculum guideline feedbacks allow for a lot of changes? I know it sort of drag that process out, but...
Right. Well, there were teachers who were on those committees as well. There were also some of the questions that were made by Advanced Systems, which was the company, and they had done tests in other states, and how much they borrowed from the other states and how much raw input from Massachusetts, I don't know. Also, I think the teachers who were on those committees had extremely high standards, and that oftentimes there were people from higher education on those who didn't necessarily understand what a 4th grader, they may have been a little bit removed from what was realistic for a 4th grader to be able to answer. So yeah, there is feedback. How much they listen, I'm not sure, but teachers are always telling them what they think about them. I can tell you at every meeting I go to. And the second part of the question was, expectations.
How did the way Wakefield students do
Yeah.
generally compared to your expectations? Not so much your worry, or like they did okay, they did good.
Well, that's part of it.
Here, yeah.
It's a little hard after you've got them because, as you were saying earlier, none of us live in a vacuum. And so no matter what, you're always drawn into, the first thing is, how did we do compared to, we all get pulled into that because we know that's what's going to happen. So I would say, at the elementary level, we were proficient. The average score was proficient for math and science and almost for the English language arts. The middle school, I thought they should have done better than they did, and I'm not quite sure why they didn't yet. And we've been talking to the teachers. And at the high school, again, somewhat of a mixed bag. I think part of the high school was the length of the test, and at the end, by the time you get to 10th grade, you can figure out when things count and when they don't. And that doesn't mean to say that all the students didn't try. I think the vast majority tried very, very hard on them. But I think when you're into that 15th hour, whether you put that extra effort into figuring out that last question or not, you may have said, nah, it's not going to count. So I think there was a little bit. I think this year that it'll be different because I think now the students have seen, well, gee, people really care about these things, whether it's going to determine my graduation or not. And I also think when you go home from school and that individual report is waiting for you, you want to be able to say you put forth your best effort. So I think for the few students last year who didn't put the effort in, I don't think we'll see as much of that this year, even though it still doesn't technically count toward graduation.
So in essence, in a way, you're saying that there was a more positive sense about how you felt overall the elementary schools throughout the town were doing, as reflected by that test. That it was that you were a bit discouraged at the middle school results overall, and that the high school was a combination of both, some sense of things are working or satisfying with some areas that were trouble.
Yeah. It was a real mixed bag.
So in terms of resources, that might then get reflected in where you put financial resources. I'm a parent with elementary school
Right.
kids myself as well, and it sounds like some of the people asking questions here have been
Well,
at that end.
I mean, our view is that the elementary is the cornerstone, that it's critical that we have a good, solid elementary program, good, solid reading language arts, because if we don't, you can be sure that these children aren't going to be able to answer these questions. A lot of these questions are reading. Even though the state says that doesn't count, indeed it does. These are math problems where you have to read and understand what they're asking for. And the same thing with science. And so if you do not have good reading comprehension, you are going to have difficulty on this test. So it's critical that our elementary program produces good readers.
You didn't really say you're pleased with the elementary results, though.
No, I said that I was happy that we were at the average range, the proficient range, that the average score was at the proficient range. I'd like that to...
What was it for English? I thought it was very,
It was 238 or something. 230.
the majority of people were in the improvement, wasn't it? That way it went down.
Right. The average for this district was The average for the district was 233. And most of the students fell in that needs improvement, but you have to realize that needs improvement. I think there were about 20-something% that were in that range that were just below the needs proficient. Remember we talked about those range of scores, the intervals that they had? And when we looked at them, there was a large number that were in that higher end of the needs improvement, which, better there than at the lower end of it.
Obviously, but doesn't that say that that's where most of the should be?
That's where what?
If you have a curriculum that is producing
Yes. Oh, there's no doubt about it. That's what the elementary school is key to having students succeed later on in school. Absolutely. Well, we have a new language arts curriculum. We're working on a new, well, it's aligned to the framework, and we think it's very good. It takes into all the different parts of the framework, and it addresses all the different sections and subtopics that are supposed to be addressed in K through 4. We also, feel we have a strong reading program that we're about to implement. We have teachers now who are piloting different programs. We've been working on trying to find the best reading program we can for our elementary students.
But like someone else said, it's not new to us, or it sounds right around us. Is there any collaboration with what
Yes.
found to be successful?
Yes, there is. We've had a person who's come from Reading who's done several workshops here on the Writer's Workshop, which is something they use extensively in Reading, in the elementary schools. And for the last 2 years, we've been having a workshop after school summers on the writing process and the Writer's Workshop, and using the exact model that the teachers at Reading are using. Yes.
Question I have is that since the state curriculum, which is very different than what you are using, would it not be helpful for the parents to have the curriculum that you are using now, and then compare that with the resources we have, the state curriculum, and see where you fall deficient?
Okay, the state doesn't have a curriculum. The state has a curriculum framework. Okay. Right. Yes. And in the mathematics and in the English language arts, the frameworks, I believe there are copies in the public library, but if not, we can get copies for you. And what you'll see is that curriculum guide identifies the curriculum framework from the state with what we're doing here. In fact, that's how we develop them, saying, here's what the state's asked, and this is what we should be teaching at each grade level to meet that. Yes.
My concern is, and I've seen it not just in this area, and I'm sure this is frustrating for you, the 20 or 30 people who brought up earlier here, and to hear that we want to be, I understand your point where you say we want to get these kids to be proficient, where I hear it's not a big deal, and plenty of meetings say, we're average, we're at least meeting the same average. If we ever want to be better than average, we get the average amount of federal aid to students per student, we get the average amount less than average on special ed. How do we get to a point, you said you got a small amount of money for an after-school tutoring program. How do we as parents advocate for this school system to get better than average so that we can have kids who are going to be better than average?
Come to school committee, go to town meeting, go to your PTO, join your school council. Those are the places where you can advocate. And we'd appreciate any help we can get.
My concern is that you have 20 people that are doing that. And there's almost 4,000 kids in this town, and there's 30 parents at this meeting trying to figure out how we're going to make our students better able to be able to take these tests and to do better in the future.
Well,
My daughter took the test last year. She did horrible. And I have 2 kids coming up that are going to be taking these tests.
well, one of the reasons we're having this on cable TV is hopefully people will hear comments like that and hear the general discussion that's gone on here tonight. You know better than I, living in the town, what's the best way to advocate for the schools?
I'm disappointed in the amount of empty seats here. I'm 79 years old, and why am I here? My grandchildren
Well, basically, what is it that they want taught? I think part of it goes back to the old New England autonomy for the local town. I think there's a lot of that history that most people would not like to see the state telling us what to teach. But in essence, with these frameworks and these tests, they are telling us what to teach. Well, but I think it's important that you came tonight, and I thank those who did come tonight. And, talk to your neighbors. The schools need your support. And we're going to be working as best we can to improve the scores, and we're not happy with being average. We'd like to be better than that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we have principals from the different schools here, and at your PTO meetings, is curriculum discussed, and I know they're very much discussed at the school council meetings, which are open meetings. They do a lot with that and looking at that. And again, part of the thing about a PTO meeting is it's up to the parents to come in and make the PTO what you want it to be. That's what it is, a parent-teacher organization. And if you want it to be more than a fundraising organization, that's what you have to make it. Nancy? 85. 85%. Yes, every year do we put in the paper, Nancy? It's published in the paper every year.
I can't hear the question.
It's available, where is it?
It's available in Guidance Office. It's that senior special we send you every year, every student, and we're the front.
Yes.
Just curious, I heard your comments about how you have to pass the test in the 10th grade in order to graduate at some point in the future, 2003, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Is that to say that a child that fails in the 10th grade will have no opportunity to graduate even for 2 years to go in high school?
No. You take the test in 10th grade. The reason they gave it in 10th grade was so that you could take it again. We don't know how many times you'll be able to take it, but you'll at least be able to take it once in 11th grade and once in 12th, and they may have, we don't know yet. The state hasn't given us the details, but that was the reason why they gave the test in 10th grade, so there would be opportunity for students to take it over again.
Just one follow-up. My oldest child isn't taking the test until this spring, fourth grade. Are there 2 extra parts that will be added to the test this spring?
Now, this springtime, they had a long writing sample last year, and they did it all during the same week. They're taking the writing sample out and putting that in a separate week in April. Then in May, for the 8th and 10th grade, they're adding the social studies portion. In the 4th grade, they will probably just do the field testing of the 4th grade of the social studies questions. So it's almost the same as last year, except they're taking a little out. That's okay.
I'm too concerned about how test scores will come out. I don't necessarily believe it's a disaster or a serious problem. It's a benchmark from which to start. One thing I'd like not to see is to have teachers spend an inordinate amount of time just doing practice exams and things just to prepare you to take the test. I heard you say things like tutoring. I heard you say things like teaching them how to take the test better. I've taken standardized tests in school and professionally, and I know that you can improve
It's interesting, we had a meeting this afternoon with the high school department heads, and we were talking about the test, and we were talking about the questions. And one of the things we talked about was the fact that what we need to do is take these types of questions and incorporate them into the content we're currently teaching, so that we're using the test to our advantage. We're not giving up anything in order to give kids test-taking techniques, that in fact we take what we're currently teaching and develop questions that fit this format. Yes?
I just want to also, it doesn't seem to me that, I don't know, to clarify this for me, the state is, so far hasn't given the guidelines for what we'll be passing for 10th graders when that becomes a reality. At the moment, it seems unlikely that quote-unquote proficient, the term used on that, would be the same or equivalent to passing on what they offer, because over half of students in many communities in the state didn't meet that mark.
Right.
So
Right.
in all likelihood, some score that's in the needs improvement terminology on this particular test will actually be the whatever cutoff point numerically is equivalent to passing, so that you'll have sort of two different
Right.
languages being
Right.
applied. Is that right?
Well, again, you're exactly right. We don't know what it is. Some people have said if you have failing, is everything else passing? Remember what I said before, that these designations were argued, debated over, and they're arbitrary. I mean, we're calling that category needs improvement, but there were others who argued that it should have been called basic, which is what they used to call in the old, the former testing that they had. We don't know yet. Right, we don't know yet what the cutoff is going to be.
You might find that there are a large number of students who, from one language, are deemed,
Needs improvement, but they pass.
another language
Right,
sufficient
to graduate, right. And we don't know that yet. State hasn't determined that.
That's the goal, to get everybody to graduate. I agree with the goal to make as many students proficient as possible, but there's sort of a misalignment of those two.
Right, right. Yes.
I just have a comment on this. In all fairness to people who are concerned about percentages of college, I have two older children who have already gone through the Wakefield school system and have gone on to higher education and have graduated. And now I have two younger, a fourth and an eighth grader. And in reference to the grandmother that was talking about how every child learns at a different level, like those two children were products when things were levelized. Now, things are not levelized, and it started with thinking, when she mentioned that, she had said that comment, these two children now are in a program where that doesn't exist anymore. And I'm wondering if the old system works better than the new system, and if that's something that the school is looking at.
Well, part of it is,
Well, I just want to finish with
Okay.
this thought. Every child learns at a different level. I have a son, he learns at a different level, and he can't always keep up with things that are going on in that classroom. And my thoughts on that are, what works and what doesn't work. I mean, I didn't have these concerns with the old system. It seemed to have worked.
well, there's a lot of messages coming from the state and from the federal government that absolutely tells us we should not be tracking students. And in fact, at the high school level, we had to eliminate what was called the general track. So again, the message from the state is, do this, but don't do it by tracking. Achieve, but don't do it by tracking.
I remember when that all started, and I thought that was a good message. I mean, I thought it would work, but I was wondering if
I mean, there's so many pros and cons on that particular issue that,
like, for instance, when my son came up to the middle school, when my daughters came to the middle school, they had an option to take reading or a language, a different language. They were very proficient in reading, and they could go on to a language, whereas my son, his reading comprehension wasn't that great, and for him to take a language was difficult for him, so I had asked, well, can he take reading, and they said, oh, no, that's not an option anymore.
Yeah.
He has to take a language.
well, part of it,
Yeah.
but the state is saying to us that every child is supposed to take world language.
Right, but then again, now again,
Well, actually, and if we're going to introducing world language, you should be doing it in the elementary when they have more of a facility to pick it up. And again, that's a financial consideration. We do have an introduction to world language at the middle school. Next year, it'll be in 5th grade, the following year in 6th grade, and it's already in 7th and 8th grade. But again,
But
this,
that's not my fifth grade.
no, you're right. And and a lot of that has to do with financial resources.
So again,
However, the state is saying that that's the goal, to have world language and to be tested in it, but they don't have the test yet. And a lot of communities are dealing the same as Wakefield with the financial implications of having world language. Now they've changed it back to foreign language again. And so that the testing on that looks like it's slightly out of whack from what it was originally projected.
well, that's why when my son had to take the language, and I asked, well, can he be in a language class that maybe works a little slower than what he's doing because it's not working? Well, we don't have classes that teach at a slower pace. They all do the same thing.
Well, that's, on that happy note, I think that's an issue that probably you need to talk to the middle school and work with them a little bit. Mark?
Well, I got three different areas I'd like to talk about. First one is the high school, 10th grade. Even though they can take it more than once,
Yes.
I believe there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure put on them.
Oh, yes.
Passing. And also pressure on the teachers and the curriculum. Two of the things I think you need to look at, number one is what the dropout rate might be. So whatever program we have in, I think needs to be intensified along those lines. Also, although you mentioned that for the most part, when kids try hard, kids that I talk to probably have a high rate of absenteeism next year. Because I don't think that, personally, I had to push my kid out the door those weeks because it was a pain in the neck for them
Yeah.
to spend that amount of time. And I know you can't do anything about that, but just anticipate that there'll probably be more absenteeism if we're making up the test.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to get the students in here to take the test, because if they don't come in, their grade is counted as a 200.
The second question I have is three part. Number one, how long is it going to take for you to be able to analyze and evaluate the results? Second part of that would be, when are you going to come up with a plan? Because every student, every parent, every teacher should be demanding a plan to be put in place to make things happen. The third part is, how are you going to measure it? Is it just going to be MCAS results, or what are you doing in the interim years where kids aren't taking it?
In terms of planning for it, in fact, at the high school today, we talked about developing a plan. And what happens when you get there, there's all sorts of, depending on when the results come into, that this is a real problem, the results coming in after the school year's already begun, because the students have already been placed in classes. Now, what do? Pull them out? So we are talking about what can we do and where should the students be getting that extra help that they need, remediation, what kind of centers are available. So yes, each building will be coming up with a plan, and we'll coordinate that as a system-wide plan. And what was the last part?
First part was, when are you going to be done?
Okay. That's a hard question, Mark, because there is just so much material and the matter of time. When can teachers look at this material? You can't do this, at a half an hour after school. It takes a long time to go through all this material with all the teachers involved. So we're using the in-service day that we have on January 15th for the high school and elementary to look at that. We're talking about having some possible Saturday workshops, and of course, over the summer, that's going to be our major focus this summer.
So are we looking at that by the end of the summer? Will you finish your analysis?
Yeah, we should have a pretty good idea.
And you would have come up with a plan?
We should have a pretty good idea of the places that need shoring up, and the places that the kinds of teaching that may need to change in order to implement that. We should have a good idea from these test results during the summer. We should be able to do that.
Does the school department look at these test results, I know it's early, as a crisis, as just a learning experience? Is it just middle of the road, we're going to try to do a little bit better? I don't know what the school department's read on this is. I can give an idea what the parents' read is on it, even though there's a few people here. There's a lot of people that aren't happy.
Mhm.
I want to know whether the school department's happy.
No, we're not happy. We'd like to have the school as better. And so that's what we are going to work toward. Whether it's crisis, no, I think it's a realization. These are here to stay. And that we need to adapt and adopt whatever it takes to bring about improvement for all our students.
I hear that, Rose, but I get the feeling, it may just be me, that the curriculum hasn't caught up with the framework designation that's been put up. And that the curriculum probably won't catch up for about another 2 or 3 years between the training that's needed of the teachers and the administration, passing that along so that the first and second graders will be in a position to take that test and have a fair shot at it.
You know,
And if that curriculum is that long coming, it kind of scares me that there's probably nothing worse in my mind than my kid being on the honor roll last year gets poor results on the test. Are they being taught?
yeah, that doesn't, just because we're not totally aligned doesn't mean that what isn't going on isn't very good stuff anyway. For instance, the fact that there's some trigonometry on the math test in 10th grade, doesn't mean we're aligned. But does that mean we're going to change all our curriculum to teach everyone trigonometry in 9th and 10th grade? I'm not sure. It's a very small portion of the test. Do we need to do that or not? That's what we have to look at and analyze. Or do we want to concentrate our efforts on making sure they know how to do algebraic functions better? And so, yeah, when you say they're not totally aligned, that doesn't necessarily mean that what's being taught in their place isn't also very valuable stuff.
I guess my biggest concern is that if you put a plan together and it's beginning of September and you initiate that plan, however big it is, you are rolling the dice and not knowing how well the kids are going to do until the following November.
Mark, we're always analyzing our curriculum. We're always changing our curriculum. This isn't really anything new. Since you've been in school if you look at what's going on, every few years, in every topic, we look at how we're teaching and what we're teaching. So I just look at this as an ongoing process that we've always done, except that we have a different guideline now than we had in the past. So it's not really that radical a change. For the most part, we're doing most of the stuff that needs to be taught. There are just some minor things that probably need to be adjusted. Well, yes, question? Great, thank you, I appreciate that. Jeff?
I just,
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. And again, there's lots of information on the internet as well. Thanks. Good night now.